Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's so good to see you all. My name is Bob Leonard. I teach in the Theater and Cinema program in the School of Performing Arts, and I'm really thrilled to welcome all of you. There's a host of folks on Zoom and folks here in Blacksburg in the Blacksburg Public Library. This is the first of a series of talks in the School of Performing Arts 2024 Colloquium series. These talks and exchanges by nationally recognized artists and leading thought leaders are a core piece of our MFA program in the graduate seminar. They bring their perspectives, insights, experience, hopes, and strategies into the studies of the next generation of theater makers here at Tech. We've discovered over the course of time that these exchanges about art and community, how art serves to build community and engages with civic dialogue, serve the interests of folks well beyond the classroom. It's just great that you are all here, either in person in the library or on Zoom. I'd like to remind you that following the afternoon's exchange, we will be hosting two more in the series, Harold Stewart on Thursday, March 21, and Megan Carney on Thursday, April 4, both at 4:30. Harold is the executive director of the New England Foundation for the Arts and the board chair of the Theater Communications Group. Megan is the artistic director of About Face Theater in Chicago. Both these leaders will offer their unique experiences and valuable national perspectives that can have direct, immediate impact on how we understand and utilize the arts in our own communities, large and small, across the country. For our audiences on Zoom, I'm grateful to Rebecca Dawn, who is managing the online experience this afternoon. Rebecca is a post-MFA fellow in the theater program. Please feel free to use the chat feature to communicate with Rebecca if you have any tech issues. Is everybody okay on Zoom? Speak up now or whenever you run in. Thanks for the thumbs up. We have many people registered to be on Zoom, and I appreciate that you will respect our request that you remain muted unless Rebecca invites you to unmute. When it comes time to respond to our speaker with your thoughts and or questions, please enter your thoughts or your desire to speak on chat so Rebecca can keep order in our exchange. I am so excited now to introduce our speaker. I first met Mei Ann online. She was a panelist in a theater communications group workshop designed as a forum to help leadership engage with the challenges facing professional theaters across the country in this tumultuous time. Mei Ann stood out to me as a particularly articulate artist with a deep organizational experience and an organizer who engages with administration as a creative act and as an artist. On finding out more about Mei Ann, I came to learn there was no wonder at how wonderful she is. Mei Ann Teo is a queer immigrant from Singapore, making theater and film at the intersection of artistic, civic, contemplative practice. As a director, deviser, dramaturg, they create across genres, including music theater, intermediate participatory work, reimagining classics, and documentary theater. Teo works internationally at festivals, including Belgium's Festival de Liège, lyrics from Lockdown by Brian Bain, Edinburgh International Fringe, Beijing International Festival, Singapore Theatre Festival. They have directed and or developed across the country, including the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, Theatre Works Hartford, Playwrights Realm, Goodman Theatre, Public Theatre, Berkeley Rep, Crowded Fire, History Theater, Page 73, Musical Theater Factory, and the National Black Theater. Recent works include Madeline Sayet's Where We Belong, film and national tour, the U.S. premiere of Amy Berryman's Walden at TheaterWorks Hartford, which was awarded Best Production and Director, Connecticut Critics Award, and the English U.S. premiere of Stefano Mazzini's 7 Minutes at Waterwell. Teo has received the League of Professional Women's Josephine Abity Award, is the inaugural recipient of the Lilly Fan Director Lilly Award, and has formerly served as the Artistic Director of Musical Theater Factory and the Associate Artistic Director and Director of New Work at Oregon Shakespeare Festival. They are an artistic leader at Ping Chong and Company, which is going through the transition from Ping Chong's leadership over the last 40 years to an entirely new way of understanding administrative leadership in that particular company. It's a great joy to introduce Mei Ann Teo. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you so much, Bob, and thank you for the invitation. It's so good to be here with you. I'm calling in from the land of the Piscataway, Washington, D.C. I happen to be here at the Folger Shakespeare Library, remounting the last stop of Where We Belong by Madeline Sayed. If not, I would be there with you. And we're currently in getting ready for tech. So I was thinking like, oh, could I pop down to Virginia? And unfortunately, it didn't work out. I just took a step away from rehearsal before I go back in later tonight. Let's actually like land. I need this, and I hope maybe some of you need it too. Go ahead and rub your hands together. Build up that heat. Yeah. And with this hand, you're going to sweep or tap, whatever you prefer, trying to get to your entire body, whatever you feel comfortable with in the space that you're in. So I like a little sweep, a little tap. Oof. Try to tap every little part. Oh, breathe. Oh, sometimes you need a little bit more here in the chest, yeah? Try to get as far back to your back. Those of you in the classroom, help each other out if you want. Down. Oh, and for those of you who are able, just give a couple of little hops. Oh. And then when you're ready, body all alive. Here we come back. Thank you for doing that with me. It's something when our blood is moving. And I feel like the miracle of my life is that I get to do the things that make my blood boil and move through my body in all of the different ways that give me more life in order to share my passion with folks. And I am just really grateful for this moment to be here. Sometimes I think that the fact that I'm able to show up today is a miracle. I was born in Singapore, which is a very field of censorship, like this, a pretty repressive society. I do not come from a family of artists. And I was brought up in a Seventh-day Adventist home, which is a very conservative Christian denomination that the prophet of the church, Ellen White, even said theater is a tool of the devil. And so every place that I grew up in was kind of like a box that didn't allow this kind of life and this kind of work that I do to exist in, or at least that's what I felt like I was brought up to believe. And when I think about it, underneath that miracle are the fact that my father and mother are educators, social workers, innovators in their own way. And while I might not come from a stock of artists, I came from people who deeply think about those who are around them, who are the first people to find out every single one of your stories if you're in a room with them, and who are deeply curious. So I feel like this moment that I'm with you here is both like a miracle, like how on earth did I end up here as a theater maker talking to you today? And also it was every step of my life has brought me to this moment to talk to you, to meet you, to have this conversation. So I think I'm supposed to talk about sort of theater practices, function, the form, social and political life of communities. And in thinking about that, Bob read something that's in my bio. I say I work at the intersection of artistic, civic, and contemplative practice. And I think I'll start to unpack that as we go along because it's something that I found to be very helpful in how I think about the work that I say yes to and the work that I do and what guides me next. So let me give you a little bit of like a moment of like what am I doing now? What is like most alive in my body now? Where We Belong is by a Mohegan theater maker named Madeline Sayet. Um, yes, and for those who arrives, great. I'm also paying attention to chat. Also, if anybody has things along the way of like clarifying question or whatever, anyone in the chat, anyone in there, feel free to be like, oh, hang on, don't go past that. I want to talk about that. Or write it down and ask me later. Either way is fine. I love a conversation. Just know that all of that is welcome in this space. Madeline Sayed is an incredible theater director and writer and performer now, who wrote about her story of being going to England to study Shakespeare and what that meant for the echoes of her ancestors who had gone to England to plea against the genocide of their people. And it's a piece that is heartwarming and funny, and some people in the class have already read it, which like wonderful. And those of you who are nearby Washington DC, we open on February 21st. We've got previews before that. If you come through, I'll say hello. So Where We Belong, it's truly one of those like life-changing moments for me where I started to understand in a very different way what theater can do in a community. You know, you have the pretty much the only story that I've ever heard of a Mohegan person and what their journey is to understand what has happened in the history of their people. And, you know, I came to be a part of it simply because I was invited by Maddie Sayet to direct a reading of it at Playwrights Horizons like 6 years ago. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't know what I have to offer, but I'll show up. And she reminded me of what happened the first rehearsal that helped her trust me. And I had forgotten it. She was like, in the first rehearsal, she said, "Oh, the first time I met me, the first day of rehearsal 6 years ago, I came in drenched, completely drenched." And Mei Ann was like, let's get you a towel and here's a sweater. And I gave her my sweater because, you know, I'm not going to have her running around like wet. That sounds terrible. And I had another layer. And she remembered that. And then the next time I think was we were trying to figure out what the we were going to put the play up. It started at Shakespeare's Globe in London. And um it was that space is so beautiful. It doesn't really have, you don't really need any set or anything like that. It was basically her telling her story. And I remember that we had a consultation with Asa Benali, who was our costume designer, and he was there and he said, "Oh, um we're looking for pants that might have some sort of like feathering technique or something like that." And he was describing something and I said, "You mean like my pants?" And I looked down at my pants and it was exactly what he had described. And it was one of those moments where I was like, oh, I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be because I have something to offer where I wasn't sure what I had to offer. And I think that when I think about the trust that I constantly have of like, well, I'll show up and maybe I'll have something to offer. I'm hoping the same thing today. Um, so there's something about what it meant to sort of give freely to this piece that has brought me so many incredible learnings as I have sort of been a part of it. One of the things that Maddie's taught me a lot about in terms of like in community is she has had such clarity of when this play is done, what other things should happen around it. So there's an accountability writer that goes along with a piece where every place that this is done, the theater is also promising to provide free tickets to Native folks. The theater's also going to set up all of these other events that are happening with other Native artists. and lifting up the local Native artists in that place alongside the story of an northeastern tribe of Native American people. So there are all of these things that started to come together that I've been learning so much about. That is such a beautiful thing about, oh, how are we actually doing this thing? How are we actually thinking about not continuing an imperialist mentality of ownership and taking over, but sharing and increasing the resources always to lift more people up? And I feel like that, like Where We Belong and Maddie Say It, and honestly, the producers that have really stood behind her in every step of the way, Woolly Mammoth, Folger Shakespeare Library, that has been such a powerful way of doing things that I never actually understood. Also, new work development. It's a one-person show. Early on in the process, she said, everyone, let's actually I want to gather together 5 native actors from across the country. I'm going to have them read my words. Now, oftentimes when we do new work development, we're thinking about, oh, who can we come in to like do those things? But I've never done it with a one-person show when it is their life. One would assume that they are the expert in their life and the things that they're talking about. And one would be right for the most part. But what happened with those 5 people that came by? One was actually also named Maddie and a Mohegan and was also training to become a medicine woman. The others were folks from all over Turtle Island, different genders, and the richness of perspective that was brought into this room for a one-person show really expanded what the show talked about. The show didn't really actually talk much about Mohegan women ancestors. It was mostly men. That really opened up because the other Maddie was like, well, what about this person? What about this person? What about this person? And it was kind of it broke my brain a little bit, even as a Newark person, of how the possibilities of being in community can be when we don't need to hold ourselves as the expert, even though we would be assumed to be. And that's something that really also was part of like, how do we do this thing next? So Where We Belong has been a case study of like, how do we transform the thing that we're in? So from the moment we did it in London at the Origins Festival, then Maria Goyanes called at Woolly Mammoth and said, well, we want to do it. And then the pandemic hit. And then we didn't have any vaccines at the time. So we had to decide whether or not we had an audience of 20 or we would actually film it and then have it sent out. Now, a lot of the things I've learned too about storytelling from the Mohegan perspective is Maddie's taught me that like the story doesn't actually is not alive unless there are ears who haven't heard it can hear it. So we're figuring that out. It's like, okay, well, how do you tape a thing? Because when you tape a thing, you can't actually, with not a live audience, you can't actually have like a vocal response. So we went through a lot of like, how do we do this thing? And we know that it's important because, the most important person for her to hear the story was a 16-year-old Mohegan. So I was like, well, we do the film, that's going to get to the 16-year-old Mohegan more than if we are, here in Woolly Mammoth in a shutdown. Um, so there's this moment too where we had to decide like how do we make sure that she gets the interaction and engagement that she needs to tell the story while also knowing that it is not a live form that we're doing. And also it's hard if you ever saw the show or if you ever get to see the show, there's a lot of processing of what it is to be inside of Native Shakespeare, to be inside of all of this struggle between the language that you love, Shakespeare, and the language that you love that is being eradicated and is going constantly on the edge of extinction with the Mohegan language. And so one day she came in, it was right before we filmed the thing, and she said, okay, I have an idea. It's going to require interpretive dance. I was like, excuse me? And she was like, if you all, while we're filming it, if you give me some sort of like body indication of response, then we can tape it. It'll be clean, but I will also know that I'm not alone out here. And I was like, okay, I'll do anything. I'll do anything, make it work. I'm that kind of director. Like, I will do anything to make it work. You tell me to dance, I'll dance. And I remember thinking, like, okay, well, what's appropriate, right? When she's telling a funny story, I'm like, okay, great. I can laugh. I can laugh. I can great. When she's talking about being in the British Museum and seeing all of these mishmash placed objects where they clearly don't understand the life, that those are the relatives and the spirits and not just objects. They're animate, they're not inanimate. How does that even happen? How do I respond respectfully? How do I respond with my body in a way that can feel the impact of the story and allow myself to participate and also, like, be there for her? And I remember lifting my hands, and I remember how it felt to hear the story through my body. And I heard it more deeply than I ever heard before. Um, and it helped me realize, like, what it means to take things in through the body, and that is the reason why theater and the live performance act can actually never be replaced with AI. We're talking a lot about that right now. But that the sound waves are physical, that it actually moves through you. And what it means for a director, which is my main practice, my artistic practice is directing, that I am the first audience always. What is my responsibility being the first audience of any world that's being created by an artist? And what a sacred act it is to be the first audience. So I'm going to pause here just for a second, take a little drink. And then I'm going to talk about how, like, the students have a lot of information about the work that I've been doing. Yes, thank you, Heart Severin. Feel free to respond in chats or whatever, do what you like. And I want to talk a little bit about, like, what made me be able to be in this moment. Um, I learned documentary theater when I was in high school. I started to learn how to make as a deviser. That kind of training, that kind of invitation into making from the ground up, uh, is of was sort of everything to how I learned how to be a theater maker, making in community. And most of my career has been within the context of documentary theater and generative performers and making from the real. Um, Even though maybe now half of the work I do are plays and fictional, but there's always something that I deeply pull from what is the real. The work, I think, that changed everything for me was when I was a resident artist at Pacific Union College. And at that point in time, I had sort of graduated with a finance degree. Yes, I have a BBA in finance. I wanted to be a good Chinese child, and that was important to me. Um, I see nods. Yep. I didn't know how to stand in what I needed to do for my life. I remember the moment where I was graduating from undergrad and thinking to myself, oh, I should probably do an accounting internship. My sister does finance. Everyone loves her. She's golden child. How do I Eric N is in the room? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Just saw that. I just love Eric N so much. Hi Eric. Um and uh theater of the real, finance degree. And I remember the moment where I thought my whole body reacted viscerally against the thought of, like, how can I be doing this? Like, what is actually my life going to be? And I know a lot of you who are in MFAs and past MFAs and me still in this moment are like, what am I doing and why? And it was in that moment that I started to understand that my body knows. that my body knows deeply what I should and should not be doing. So I encourage all of you to listen to your body. And I knew in that moment that that's not the place I was going to make a life in. And so soon after that, I um, did an internship at Berkeley Rep. Internships were great. It was fantastic. I learned a lot about professional theater. I learned a lot about, from Rita Moreno and Moises Kaufman and Tony Tacconi and lots of incredible folks about professional theater. And then I became the resident artist at the school that I graduated from, and I started to make work in that community. And that for me was the most necessary, profound thing I could do for my life. And I'm saying this especially because it's counterintuitive sometimes. Um, I think that I had a lot of assumptions about what it meant to go into do professional theater and that whether or not I should come back to the place where I was at. But the invitation to come back to that place and to find work that was making with that community was so much more important than um um just entering into the industry without any sort of purpose that I could really feel from my bones. So when I went back to Pacific Union College, I started doing things that I was learning, right? I was like, okay, let's do some Shakespeare, let's do some Moliere, let's do some classics. Let me figure out how to do that. And at some point in time, I started to understand something. I was like, you know what? My 12th night was good. It was fun. Everybody enjoyed it. That was great. But someone else is doing it better somewhere else. And there's something more that we can do that is for us and by us and about us than Shakespeare could have ever written. What can we actually do that pulls from our history, from our experience, that actually we can see ourselves more thoroughly in it? What about all these stories? What about all these incredible stories? And I started to understand the whole idea of how do you subvert the great man theory, where there is one leader, there's one person, one writer to write the thing that we'll all do, and I started to pull back on all of the learnings that I had of making theater and in Singapore, in the training programs that I've been through. And I thought, what if we actually started to question all the big things that are sort of there in front of us? What happens if we're able to say, in this community, what is the biggest question that is alive? And I remember the moment they had a choir room Sabbath school, and one of the professors was studying Shakerism. And he had said, in studying this, I looked at the patterns that happen when you have a founder of any religion. The first generation that's alive during the time of the founder believes that this person has a real message, has a direct connection. They're inspired by that person, and they're ready to follow that person and where they're going. The second generation, when the founder dies, puts that person up on a pedestal, makes that person perfect, inerrant, unique. The third generation, in response, tears that person down off the pedestal. And the fourth generation, what is that fourth generation left with? And when he asked that question, I remember thinking to myself, whoo, what am I? Am I, third, fourth, like fifth? Like, where am I in this whole journey of Adventism and Ellen White and that? And that I started to look around. I started to go, oh, my dad is definitely two. Oh, this professor, I think that professor's three. That professor's real angry. Oh, this person. And I started to ask questions of my community that started to open up what wounds had happened within the people that I loved. And all of this started from like loving a community that was nurturing me and then wanting to ask the questions even more deeply and in public of what people in private or in like academic conferences would ask. How can we make it actually real to those that are around us? So I put it out there, and there are a lot of younger folks who are like, why are we doing this about Ellen White? I want to do, a musical, like there's a lot of that. And And I remember thinking to myself, I might not have enough people. I might have to do it myself. Like I might have to act myself to say like we can do this. And the one of the things I find is that whoever shows up is perfect. That's exactly what needs to happen, is what happens. There's no need I've really found to regret, but it's really like a beautiful thing to just like, okay, great, you're here, let's go. And we made a piece that that uh became so important to the community that we went on tour all across California. We extended the run from 10 performances to 20 because people kept coming up to watch it. There is such deep healing that happened because every performance, what would happen after that, people would stay and listen to talkbacks and participate in talkbacks for an hour after the show because there is so much that people needed to talk about, and it gave them a space to hear people who not wouldn't normally be able to speak to each other be able to share with one another. Yes, William Cleveland is talking. Yes, I'm excited about this. The accountability writer reminds me of the practices used by Big Art in Australia and the very long-term relationships they form with their community partners. They use these kinds of environmental impact covenants, the social ecosystem impact reflections, as the regular part of their community-centered, community-engaging, community-responsive work. These roots define the work in ways that are constantly surprising and enriching. Love that. Yes, thank you for lifting that up. And whoever comes is the right person. And you also have to believe that you're the right person. I oftentimes think, am I the right person for this? And I was like, oh, I guess I was called. I was called to it. So here you go. So that piece was called Red Books. And I think that Red Books was, one of a few things that I would continue to do in communities. I also worked in China. I did a piece called 我们这样开始. This is how we begin, where we looked at what they were learning in education. I naively thought, oh, I'm going to go and make a piece about Mao. No, it's called a jail sentence, and I'm a Singaporean citizen. No one's coming for me. But I would also do work in factories in China. We made a piece about their dreams, about where they were and what they wanted. And every single time I make a piece of documentary theater, my assumptions are always shattered. I'll go into something thinking, well, they're going to dream about making money. They're going to dream about, getting away from their family, whatever. And it always never fails that I find out so much more about the people around me, and they find out much more about who they are together. To be able to build those invisible threads of being able to support and care for one another. Um, and honestly, a lot of this work has brought me to want to be a leader at Ping Chong and Company, where Ping has had such a long history of working in communities, of working with real people stories. I just feel like, every one of my steps has brought me to this moment and all the places that I support. So that to me is when I think about civic, I think about um, what it means to listen, what it means to understand the situations that are going on around us, um, and what it means to build community. So one of the fun things I love to do as a director is make rehearsal spaces. And classrooms, to be honest, because I really love being in classrooms too. And one of the things that I often do, depending on the makeup of the group, is I first of all always co-create. I say, okay, I'm gonna do this, 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 this. Um, in Walden by Amy Berryman, I was working with Diana O, Gina Yee, and Gabe Brown, really phenomenal artists and performers. And I offered, I was like, here's something like maybe we all teach each other something every day. Um, and everyone's invited to participate, no one has to. And what that does is it puts everyone in a space of teaching and learning in a way that subverts the hierarchical thing of I'm the director and I know everything. It actually makes people be the expert. I can still remember the things that we were taught. I remember how Diana O opened up. They were the first one. They were like, I'm going to go first. And they led us through like removing shame. Like, I was like, go. Okay, rehearsal process. We're going to learn how to remove shame. I'm in. That's what I'm here for. And I can tell you how many times it was the first that learning carried us through the entire process. That process was the first for all three of them since the pandemic. There are so many things that changed for them. Gina Yee is one of the most brilliant actors. You can see her in Naiad. She's the doctor who's in there. She's an incredible actor. I remember how she struggled to remember lines. I remember the shame she felt because she was like, I've never had to worry about this. I was always so quick. I was always so quick. I don't know what's happening to me. And then because of grounding the process of removing shame or dealing with shame that Diana had brought in, we had tools that we had all shared. That wasn't just like the director's telling you to remember your lines, the director's doing this. No, it was a community effort that transformed our room. I remember the funnest game ever. Oh my God, go back and try this. Gabe Brown made us conduct an orchestra. And we were like, but how do we conduct? And he's like, I have no idea how to conduct. You're just going to conduct like whatever your ideas of conducting. And he put on this like incredible, I think it was a Tchaikovsky symphony. And then we all just like had the best time conducting however we're going to conduct. And that the way of play and opening that up just became something that we like laughed at. It was a game that I like always want to play all the time now. Um, One of the best learnings from that what came in from the company manager, CC Chapman. And this is something too. Everyone deserves a voice in the space. Everyone. And the more you trust your people, the more ability they feel full to be present with the work that is at hand. Oftentimes, you know, people don't really involve the ASM or people don't involve the company. I'm like, if you're there, you can participate if you choose to. Sometimes they don't want to, and that's okay too. And I remember Cece teaching us how to knit. She brought in like little things. It was so beautiful. She brought in little things of like how to knit. We worked it into the show also. And she said, these are the three learnings that I've learned from knitting. And I can tell you that these three learnings have carried me through a lot of different things. Okay, you ready for this? These are great learnings. Number one, it's not hard, it's new. It's not hard, it's new. Isn't that a good one? Oftentimes you get so stopped because it's like, it's hard. It's like, yeah, it's not hard, it's new. It's just new. Second one, it's simpler than it looks. Right? Especially when you're knitting. Oh my God, I'm like, what are you doing? But it's actually simpler than it looks when you break it down. We have the patience to break it down and understand things bit by bit to build it back up. It's simpler than it looks. And the third one is it's as complicated as you want it to be. This one bit my ass. This one came right up to me and was like, hello. It's as complicated as you want it to be. I think about all of those things in art making too. It's not hard, it's new. Walk into a brand new room, brand new team, all of that, brand new place, new housing. It's simpler than it looks. You get used to it and you get sort of accustomed to being in uncomfortable situations. And it's actually simpler. And it's as complicated as you want it to be. Sometimes you want it to be complicated. That's great for you. Sometimes I make things complicated because it helps me get through something else. And that's an amazing thing as well. So those are some community things. The other thing about community that I learned a lot from Waterwell, when I directed Stefano Massini's 7 Minutes, which is a story about 11 union members who are figuring out whether or not to give up 7 minutes of their 15-minute break and the ramifications that might happen from that, is the way Waterwell as an organization worked. Waterwell was fully committed to bringing in folks that the work mattered to and not just cultivating other theater people to be there. So the way in which when unions were in the house, the way they responded to that, the way they were seen, the incredible Elise Bryant, who is the president of the Coalition of Labor Workers, came to our rehearsal and taught us and organized us. She really did. It was amazing. The way in which the deep way in which they would bring people like Chris Smalls was at the final performance. He was the one who did incredible work in organizing against Amazon. The way in which the work can resonate more deeply is part of producing structure. I know there are a lot of like theater management people here. So it is very much about your values, whether or not the thing happens, and then what lines on the budget actually go towards that. The budget is your values. So I found that Waterwell would come in and they would say, hey, does anybody need childcare? Does anyone need childcare? We have a fund for folks who are struggling to deal with the things outside of the space, to help you to be in the space, to be the artist you need to be. And I remember just thinking like, what a way, a small, tiny company in New York City, when everybody else was like 1-person show, 3-person show, they were like, let's do an 11-person show outside of the pandemic. And we're going to offer these people a living wage. And we're going to offer these people access to funds for other things that might come up and might they need. That to me was a producing masterclass in how to take care of your community and how to expand that to the community that you want to serve. And all of this is actually really related, right? So artistic, civic, contemplative, kind of, this is the civic part. All of this doesn't actually, I think there's a lot of assumptions that I feel like I thought in before I actually got deep into community work, that it's not artistic. And that's the farthest thing I found. I think that all of this contributes and plays with and dances with artistic breakthroughs and innovations. That when we want to be safe in Maddie Say It said something. She was like, I don't want us to have an audience because I want this to be for Native folks, and no Native folks are going to show up because anyone who at this point in time without a vaccine who shows up to the theater is a sociopath. Right? She said it. And when I said it, I was like, oh, wow, you're right about that. Wow. Anyone who shows up is a sociopath because we're not safe. So what does that mean? So how can we continue to do something new? So we were still in the pandemic times. We did Walden and the theater said, okay, well, we have a small space. What if do you want to do it site specifically? We could build you a cabin outside on land that is like close to this river. And I was like, absolutely. That ability to break out from the 4 walls because we needed to opened up the ability to make this piece about 2 sisters who are astronauts who are in the future and the big question of space or Earth, that it could be outside on the Earth where we were collaborating with the sun going down. All of that became necessary when we couldn't be inside anymore. So I was able to envision it like an immersive film, right? Where people all the actors were mic'd and people had headsets, but you could have the actors walk 25, 30 feet into the distance and sit at a picnic table and have a private conversation where you see their bodies far in the distance, but you heard them clearly in your ears. And the way in which intimacy was then created from that, just, I wouldn't have been able to do that in the theater itself. All of that, I feel, I feel like the way in which we can shift a form helps us also understand a new paradigm in the same way where who are we inviting in? That changes the paradigm. How do we shift the form? the change of paradigm. I wanted to tell a story actually about Eric N. and the invitation. So I was in they called me a dramaturg. I didn't know what that meant at that point in time. I was in my 20s. And it was at Theater of You Again, and Eric was doing one of his pieces there. And they brought me in because I was training with them. And they said, okay, you'll be a dramaturg. And I remember saying I met Eric and I was like, oh, hi, I think I'm the dramaturg, but I don't know what that means. And he was very kind. He said, I think I'm the playwright and I don't know what that means. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I remember how we worked together to listen and find the different layers of this project and the way in which he invited me as a young person to be present fully and what that did for me as an art maker and for the room. I just wanted to shout that out for a second. I'm going to pause for a moment. Yeah. Yay. Love you, Eric. I want to pause for a moment because I've been talking for a long time and I would love some sort of response or question from anyone in there in the room or anyone on Zoom.
I am Camille, and I want to respond to one thing. And you have said a lot of things and really touched me very deeply. I am a disabled person, and so when you are talking of being the expert for your community, this touched me a lot because when you have a disability, all the other people have a different disability. So to be the expert of your own, this to me is very important. And that seems like it gives, a lot of things of the body of work then you can do from that. And I'm responding to this very, very deeply, And whoever show up is, that's a very interesting situation. I really respond that. And how also you build from one shoulder to another shoulder when you said 1 generation, 2 generation, 3 generation, 4 generation, then it's not the same problems because that has build up. That's very, and then you talk about the different wounds. How you are wounded. This is very, very, very interesting. And everyone deserves a voice. There's so much silence, on a lot of community that are kind of, put aside. And so I find that very powerful what you are saying. And then is it artistic? That question, because if you come from a different community, your allegiance to artistic is going to be from an aesthetic point of view. And it has definitely to be with your community because it's your community aesthetic that you are projecting to the same. So thank you. That just, I don't have a question, but I really have affirmation for what you are saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Camille. I just want to lift up William here. Whoever comes to the right people, whatever happens is the only thing that could have. Whenever it starts is the right time. When it's over, it's over. 4 principles of open space. Prepare to be surprised. These dance steps work as a creativity elixir accountability engine. I'm copying and pasting it because I love that so much. Love that so much. Thank you. What's the difference in doing such a site-specific show like Where We Belong in London versus in DC? Oh, yeah, sure. So it's such a full circle moment right now because when the piece started, she was writing it towards England. She was writing it for all of the academics that would say shit to her like, you need to be more objective, and she's like, this is, I'm talking about the genocide of my people. Like, what do you mean objective? What do you mean cooler? Can you be cooler about it? And she's a very passionate person. So I think that having it in the Wanamaker space at that point in time versus the Folger, there's a lot of similarities in the space. These spaces that were constructed are beautifully like it's so great to be in there because if you're sitting in one place and you're laughing, the person across the way can feel your laughter. It's very different from a regular proscenium that we have. It feels almost like a thrust. It feels almost like a round in a way. So I would say actually more than all of the other places that the show went to, it actually feels more the same because of the structure of the space of these Elizabethan theaters. What the big difference is the people. Maddie wrote it many years ago. Now she's coming to it as someone who's older. So the realizations have more maturity to them.
Mm.
And then the other person who's performing also is around the right age of when Maddie actually went through this journey. So it's interesting to see how the body of the person and what happens with the body of the person shifts and changes depending on that time. Great. I want to share a little bit about contemplative. Artistic, civic, contemplative. This is one of those spaces that Eric also helped open up a lot for me. I think when I think about how I measure my life, I think about measuring my life in paradigm shifts. So it's a good day if my whole world is changed. It's a good day, always a good day. And I value it so much as an educator, how many paradigm shifts I receive from my students. I thank them deeply for it. I learned about the word Anthropocene from a student. They came in talking, I taught at lots of smart schools, so they have a lot of smart teachers. They learn from the smart teachers, and I get the best education ever. Um, and I love the fact that in spaces like that I've learned, and it also gives me great pleasure when I, as a director, as an educator, I say something, people are like, oh, I'll write that down, because I know that because that matters to me, of my world to be shifted. That is also what I do. And that's something to remember. Whatever matters to you, like that you've hit, is something that you have the capacity to do. That is something that I learned from city company training. Akiko would say, whenever you're looking at someone do, um, um, you know, viewpoints or whatever, and you see that they're doing something so beautifully, the way they're picking up on a cue or whatever like that, you have the capacity to do it because you can recognize it. And whatever you're noticing, you're like, ooh, that's terrible. Watch out, because you have that too, right? So whatever you can recognize is also part of you. And that's a beautiful thing, because the more that you recognize, the more you're willing to recognize, the more you're willing to shape, that is also your capacity. That is also your ability to grow and change, the more you can recognize transformation. So contemplative practice became, I've somebody who has always been a seeker, someone who is thinking a lot about spirituality and where that lies in religion. And what I've found is that more understanding, more patience in that which is the unknown, is the life that I've chosen in the theater. all of that. Yes, love you, Eric. You just DM'd me. And the one of those big moments of change that I went through was when I decided to go to a silent retreat for 7 days at Spirit Rock in California. I think before that, it was something that was always very terrifying to me. A friend of mine had told me that about 4 years before I actually went to one. And I was like, there's no way I can do that. I'm a chatty bitch. You can tell I've been talking for how long already. And I thought that this was impossible for me, but something happened in the silence that helped me to understand theater even more. Theater, the definition from the Greek theatron, means a place of seeing. And they meant it quite literally. You have a place to see. You can see the action. But I love that as a metaphor. A place of seeing, a place of understanding, a place of being able to see what you haven't been seen before. So what I call theater is large. It's not just the thing that you can buy a ticket to. It also is all of the rituals that help you see. I practice theater when I meditate in the morning, the place of seeing. And I also think that the way in which we're able to make work and think about things, I feel like everything I choose to do is an opportunity for me to grow and understand something about myself, about the world I am in, about the people I love. And so contemplative has become a very important part of my practice, because it could look like starting a class with 2 minutes of silence. It could look like meditating with a collaborator and pulling a tarot card before we get started. It could look like little practices like that. It can also look like making the piece out of practice. So I did a piece for Prelude called Hold, where we had 8:30 in the morning and 10 o'clock at night, and we would hold the day. So it was a Zoom room because it was the pandemic. Show up in the morning, would sit for 20 minutes, and then I would read something. And I remember thinking, what does it mean to hear something after you sat in silence for 20 minutes, right? The quality of hearing is different. And at night, I would invite people, queer holies, I would call them, we would sit for 20 minutes and then they would sing a song. They would do something. Dana Alexander Jones, Troy Anthony, Dinah O. These are the kinds of people who came through who are like embody a sacred queerity in their very beings to sort of bless us, kind of seed something into the night. And then we would do that for 10 days. And that was in 2020, and it's 2024. And with some on and off times when I'm on the West Coast, I still sit in the morning at 8:30 with a few people. Some come and go, but usually there's at least one person who we've sat for 4 years together. And that was because of theater. That's because I was like, I'm going to use my theater practice to heal myself. I'm going to use my theater practice to make space to do what might look like nothing, but is to sit and be there. Yeah, so specific influences from cultural background that inspire my directorial style. This, I think, comes from studying and learning from Thich Nhat Hanh. This comes from reclaiming a lot of, because I grew up as a Christian, reclaiming a lot of Buddhism and Taoism from my cultural heritage that actually I didn't get. So there's a lot of reclamation that is happening for the directorial style. I would say, sorry, for those in the room, Mishek said, are there specific influences from your cultural background that inspire your directorial style? So I would say contemplative definitely comes from reclamation. And I think that there is feminism, queer theory, all of those things of what I have come into definitely inspire my directorial style. I will say that there's a lot of my cultural background of Seventh-day Adventism and Singaporean that I might be pushing against. That I might say not this, but this. Yeah, there's a lot of that. So the work in contemplative practice is where I feel my own work as a maker is right now. I think some of the students have had access to Labyrinth, a piece I made for the Beijing Festival in 2018, where it was it was a game where people were the show itself. I made a piece from the Alice Walker piece called Suffering Too Insignificant for the Majority to See. That the piece that Alice Walker wrote is like clearly lays out the practice of metta, and the way in which that is a process to move through of the theater. And one of the pieces also was an opera that was constructed around the story of a friend of mine who I also made a documentary about, who accidentally kills her own child, and the process of grief, and how I was sort of examining how you cannot grieve if you are in guilt, and what is the process of moving from guilt to grieve. So that is sort of a place that I'm really interested in, sort of like developing a little bit more of my work. And I also bring in all of those things into the work I do as a director. It is 5:33. I am going to pause here again and see what other questions people have.
People have questions here in the room? We have questions also coming in from chat.
I have a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to share about your experience. My name is John. I really appreciated what you said earlier about the regular experience you had when developing work in community, of commonly finding that your assumptions are pretty quickly upended as you hear people's stories and values. Would you speak a little bit about perhaps some moments in which you had to get out of your own way in order to hear fully what some of those perspectives might be, particularly if they were quite different than what you anticipated they might be?
Absolutely. Oof, so many things. Oh my God. And sometimes you'll surprise yourself. That's the best time, where you're like, you put yourself in a situation that like totally shakes your own ideas. So in Red Books, we talked a lot about like who passed on the legislative way in which Ellen White should be taken. Is it the father? Is it the mother? Right. And we had a lot of like stories of the mother going, oh, Ellen White's like a mother. And it was very gentle. And then we had a lot of like fathers like hammering that down. And the reality was that as we talked to many people, it didn't really always fill out like that. And we were trying to figure out what is the feeling of the maternal and the paternal in this process of handing down rigidity and doctrinal ideas. Because the assumption is like mother softer, father harder. And that is not true, actually. And what we did was we started to do all these things of finding out what it was like for us and our paternal relationships. And we did this exercise. Greg Schneider was the old white guy in the room, as he would say. He was a professor at the college. And then there were a couple others, like there was a high school teacher who was part of it, and then there were other students. And what we did was I said, hey, Greg, can you stand in as the patriarch? He's like, I guess I have to. He was like the sweetest man in the world. And he never mansplained me or went against my authority as someone who's like, 30 years younger and a queer Asian femme. Like I still think like, wow, what a magnificent human being. Rare to meet those. Bob's another, I'm sure. So there's this way in which we set it up, where I said, okay, Greg, you're going to stand here and you're going to look out, And in the back, there are 2 doors. And the rest of us will take turns. We'll come in through one door, we'll speak to your back, and then we'll go out the other door. And the thing we're going to say is this is, we're going to be able to say the thing that we want to say to our dad, but can't. Right? And I remember thinking like, ooh, we're going to get anger. We're going to have so much anger. Like, Dad, you fucked me up. Dad, why did you do that? Dad, come on. Like, you know? And I remember thinking like, that's what we're going to get because we've been doing all this research about the fathers being really rigid and all of, and, you know, people. So people went there and there were some of that. And then I was like, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? And I opened the door and I step out there and the only thing I could say was, I'm sorry it's been so hard for you. And I don't know how to make it easier. And I closed the door. I didn't know I was like, that's easy to say to my dad, right? No, it's not easy to say that to my dad. And I remember going, wow, I didn't even know myself until I went through this. So anybody who's helming a process, you don't need to know everything going in. Let it be a space for you to find. If not, you're cutting off something so precious about the room. If you feel like you have to know everything, it's just not possible. And that ego of like, I can't look stupid, I have to know. I'm thumbs upping myself. Look at that. It's hilarious. You know, that like that actually will cut off your experience, your full experience of going from not knowing into knowing. Thanks for that question.
Willie Jordan has a question in chat. How do you balance the academic and the applied theater with your students? What are some examples of things you think we ought to consider?
Okay, so I just taught a documentary theater class at NYU last semester. I am a shitty academic teacher. I teach through praxis. I am the last person you want to come and lecture about like timelines and like types and everything. I am fluid motion. I am gender fluid. I am, you know, sexual orientation fluid. I am just water, right? So like I am the worst person to come in and give you like those lecture on those specifics. There are other people who are phenomenal at it. What I am good at is praxis. What I am good at is flow. What I'm good at is saying, make something. I'm going to make you make something. You're going to make something when you think you have nothing to make. I can get that out of people. I can do that. And I think for me, it's knowing what I'm good at and then putting myself in the places where I'm very clear about what I'm good at and being able to say, you're going to get this if you hire me. I will not be doing this. This is not what I'm good at. Now, when you're coming out of MFA, you want to try everything. So I've tried the things. I've like taught stuff of like, we're going to read these 8 plays and we're going to talk about them. And I learned a lot by doing that. But I also learned that like, that is not the primary way I know how to teach, because my teaching basically comes from feedback and response. And like, I see the work, I respond to it, I get responses from everyone else. And I also know how to teach how an artist can learn to know what to ask for and helping them understand where they're at. So the applied theater, honestly, is I'm much better at that than the academic. So, but both are really necessary and growing. And so okay, so I kind of like didn't really answer your question, but the first thing is know what you thrive in, always want to grow, and know that what the academic is a different kind of processing. So think about the kinds of learners that you might encounter, right? So I always think about like visual learners, audio learners, kinesthetic learners. I am like off the charts in kinesthetic. If you give me a lecture, like the fact that y'all are following me along right now, bravo. I can't really do this, right? Like, bravo, bravo. I need to be moving. I need to actually like do the thing. So to me, it's about teach what you're excited about bringing forward, but also know that the different ways in which you do the thing will help people learn. I not only needed that whole thing in the 4:30 moment of the tapping, I know some of y'all needed it too, right? Like there's a way that you can be present some people need that. Some people are like, I don't need that. I just talk, right? But not everybody's the same. So I think when you think about balance, you got to think about your students. You got to think about who's in the room. You got to think about what they're walking in on. I think about that balance when I'm teaching at NYU versus when I'm teaching at Harvard versus when I'm teaching in juvenile hall versus when I'm teaching 9-year-olds in the village in China, right? That question is always at play. How much theory, how much practice? How can you sneak in the things you want them to know and have a lot of fun in doing it? Also, watch Abbott Elementary. So good. So many lessons, right? Everyone's like laughing. I love that for teaching. I'm crying all the time. I was like, oh my God, I love these people. You're teaching me so much about how you care and how you can really make things fun. Make things fun. I swear a lot. People laugh because I swear a lot. That's how I do it. Okay. Are you connecting to or working with any of the alternative community-based artists and arts organizations rising up in Singapore? Oh my God, yes. So I love that question. I'm Singaporean. Every time I can go back to Singapore and make something, I'm over the moon. The last time I did that, I worked with Wild Rice, one of the preeminent organizations in Singapore that are really developing like Singaporean voices. It's extraordinary what they're doing. And I got to work with Ruth Tang as a playwright who was writing a piece about Rebecca Sangeeta Dorai, who is an Indian actor in Singapore. And I got to develop this piece with them for the Wild Rice Festival in, oh God, what is time? 2018, I think. Sometime then. So that is one of the people that I'm learning. I will say that I don't go home often because of the pandemic. I was there for about 6 months, and then I've been doing a lot of regional work here, so I don't get to go home as often as I'd like. But I know a lot of people working in those environments, and I have huge respect for a lot of the work. I think that Singapore theater scene is one of the most developed in terms of socially engaged work of any theater scene that I've seen and been a part of. So the more people here want to know about Singapore work, it's really exciting. Thanks, William, for that question.
Thank you so much for your talk. My name is David. And I was struck by something you said earlier, and it resonated with me. It reminds me of something. This notion that theatron from the Greek means seeing place. The great folks at Theater of War, in an interview I was listening to with one of them, pointed out that the word amphitheater means technically the place of seeing both ways. Amphi means both. In other words, I see you and you see me when we are together in that space. And suddenly all the things that you've been talking about today seem to be bound up in that sort of extension of the idea of the seeing place. That in true theater, we're in a space where we are all seen, that we see in both directions. Anyway, that was just an observation from your very inspiring talk.
I love that so much. Thank you for that. I'm going to put that in my back pocket as well, David. And I want to say this. That shit came because of white supremacy. I'm going to break it down, okay? As an Asian person coming up here, there's so much more Asian work that's on stage right now, but I can tell you that it was so seldom that I would see myself. It was so seldom. I can't tell you, I can like I was the first artistic director of a non-culturally specific theater in New York who was an Asian femme in the 21st century. How is that possible? It's so crazy, right? I went to graduate school at Columbia University in New York City and didn't have a single professor of color. Not a single one. And I remember thinking of like, when I was like, I'm going to make something, what am I going to make? And I was going to be in China. I was like, what is this thing about, like, is it just about like putting Asians on stage? Because I do that a lot and I love it. Okay. That great, putting Asians on stage. And I think to myself too, like, what does it mean to ask us to go into our own very vivid lives and memories and reflect inside there? What does it mean to do that as an act of theater? And that's honestly where a lot of the contemplative work started to come, because it was like, well, I'm going to fight it all the ways I can, but how radical would it be to like not need to look at anyone else, but to encounter myself? That felt really exciting. Okay, Mishek, I share your view that breaking hierarchical structures in theater contributes to a more collaborative creative process. How do you help people who may resist this kind of working to understand this, to follow this kind of working? Some people are accustomed to certain authority. Yeah. Some people are also like, what? We're going to do check-ins? I don't want to hear other people's check-ins. And then like halfway through the process, they'll be like, I'm so grateful for this check-in time. It's like, you don't even know what you need. We're so cultured into a specific way of being and making that anything else can feel extraneous. Anything else can feel like indulgent. Anything else can feel like a space where more shame can happen. All of this is true. And I think that how you bring people along, Thich Nhat Hanh says, speak so people can hear you.
Mhm.
Right? So I think about that a lot. I also like resist that. Like I love his conversation with Bell Hooks, because Bell Hooks is like speaking the truth, and I'm like, wow, Thich Nhat Hanh, you never really thought about that, because you were working in a very different situation. Not to shade Thich Nhat Hanh, but there are ways in which that's also challenging, right? Because sometimes people don't want to hear you, right? So part of it is understanding where the borders are, where the hurt is, where the trauma is, where the walls are. Where's that wall coming from? And oftentimes it comes from deeply traumatic and toxic experiences. That's where it comes from. They're afraid of that. They're afraid that that will be used against them. Things will be used against them. And part of it is also always saying, you can if you want to, but you don't have to. You can participate, you can teach us something, but you don't have to. You can be safe. You can just learn. You're good. Your presence is enough. And I think that that kind of attitude, as opposed to taking the everyone's going to do this now for our good, that just replicates the same shit that happened before. So let it be optional, because then people have their agency to respond to and be accountable to, not their obedience. If you can get people's agency to be what they're accountable to, as opposed to their obedience, that is non-hierarchical.
Mm.
Also, let's just bring up the tyranny of hierarchiclessness. There's a great essay that was written in the 70s. Can't remember a person's name right now, but the tyranny of hierarchiclessness. It's also a lie to be completely non-hierarchical. It's a lie. Because as the director, I get to say, we're going to make something that's non-hierarchical, right? So I have to accept my responsibility of the power in which I am holding a space to be more democratic. And I am actively making sure that people have more agency to say, hey, Mei Ann, I need you to dom this a little bit more. And that's something I say to people too. I'm like, I will do this way. If you're like, Mei Ann, I need you to make that decision, I will. I have a decision waiting all the time. Sometimes I don't, and then I'll be honest. But I also step up to my responsibility in that moment of being able to say, I'm holding the space, but I'm going to make space for you to say, I don't like it. And then we can talk. You go, oh, tell me what you don't like about it. Oh, you feel like that's disrespectful. Oh yeah, I don't want that either. Great, we're on the same page. It is actually the process of finding where on the same page you are. And I fully believe, as somebody who shares flesh and blood and bones, that there are many pages that we can be on the same page about with anyone. Everyone is my teacher. And and because everyone is my teacher, I'm always trying to seek what I can learn from them, as opposed to enforcing them learning from me.
Mei Ann, I want to thank you so much for all of us for not only what you have said today, but the way that you have brought us into your thinking as equals and as partners in the struggle. I just feel that the base of storyline, of telling story, sharing personal experience, opens up this wonderful complex conversation as a model in how you include people into the process, as opposed to telling them what it is. I want to leave space for any last question that might come forward. We have time for one more. If it's there, we don't need to do one more if it's not there. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mei Ann. It's a great pleasure to have spent this time with you. You've brought us so very, very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. I look forward to hanging out with y'all students tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And
Take
thanks
care.
everyone for having been part of this conversation, part of this afternoon's event.